Claudia Quijada is doing all that she can to make sure that everything seems normal to her children. But the immigrant from El Salvador says the news that her protected status in the US is ending is frightening for her and for her family.
My kids, they say, "Mama, what's going on if you will back and there?" And I say, I don't know yet. So they worry about that.
16 years ago, Claudia came to the US without documentation. But she was allowed to stay and work legally thanks to a 1990 law that helped people from countries facing extreme conflict or disaster.
Almost my half life in here.
With their temporary protected status, or TPS, revoked, about 200,000 Salvadorians like Claudia living in the US have been told that they have to leave. This could cause major disruptions back in El Salvador, where nearly 1 in 3 people live in poverty. Migrants from El Salvador sent nearly $4.6 billion in remittances back home in 2016. That accounts for more than 17% of El Salvador's GDP in a country of just 6.3 million people. And per capita income in El Salvador is just over $4,000, according to the World Bank. But those forced to go back would face a bleak future with few job prospects in a country where last year 4,000 people were killed in gang violence, the highest murder rate in Central America.
Probably a lot of people doesn't have family anymore or doesn't have a place where to go back and live.
Consul Manuel Castillo in Denver said that since policy does not officially change until mid-2019, he's optimistic that a permanent solution can be found by then to avoid mass deportation.
These new 18 more months will be the opportunity to continue working with the United States government to create different alternatives to our people here in the United States and to identify the possibility of an alternative that made them stay and live here.
Meanwhile, for long-time US residents like Claudia, life is on hold. She wants to open a restaurant with one of her sisters, but can't until she knows that they can both stay in the country that they call home. Maria Ramos, TRT World.
So let's go straight to our guests now. Our editor-at-large, Craig Copetas, is in Paris. But first, let's go to Remi Piet in Miami, Florida. He's a senior director at the America's Market Intelligence. Remi, welcome to the show. Now, you're in Florida. It's home to thousands of undocumented Salvadorians under the TPS program. Give us an idea of how important they are to the local community where you are.
I mean, you have across the United States more than 250,000 Salvadorians living here. They have, most of them, entered the country through the TPS program. In Miami specifically, you might have around 40,000 people. And those are probably the most integrated immigrants in the United States, or in Florida at least. You have a rate of integration with people working of above 88%, which is far higher than the average American. We're talking about 65% for average American. You have a very high level of those Salvadorians that speak very good English, if not sometimes for more than half of them, only speak English at home. So those are very well integrated citizens and usually have understood the importance of education and taking the chance of living in the United States to develop companies, to develop businesses, to have a normal social lives and have kids also in Miami. You have to understand that more than maybe 100,000 or 200,000 children were born in the United States out of Salvadorian parents. So there are American citizens that will see their parents have to be deported eventually.
The Trump administration says that El Salvador has recovered sufficiently from the 2001 earthquake. The US has spent lots of money there trying to rebuild the infrastructure. What's your assessment of how ready El Salvador is for its people to go back?
I mean, obviously, the impact of the 2001 earthquake has been greatly reduced, and we're talking about 16 years ago. But Salvador is known to be a country extremely dangerous for other reasons, especially gang violence. The MS-13 is extremely active in Salvador and in the rest of Central America. And Salvador is maybe the most dangerous country on earth right now. We're talking about a death rate of 15 people a day. Now, the fact that you already had in place a series of immigration programs and potential political asylum programs through this TPS program meant that the Obama administration and other administration didn't have to develop a specific case for Salvador to welcome people that are trying to flee violence or persecution in their home country. The situation in terms of infrastructure in Salvador, well, infrastructure has been slightly developed in the country. It could have been better, and there has been a series of decisions, especially banning mining or banning a series of different extractive industries, whether they were actually compliant with environmental regulations or not, that were maybe a little bit too hasty, too direct, instead of understanding what should have been the best decision in the long term. But the key issue here for Salvador is that several $1 billion were actually arriving in Salvador, sent by the populations from the United States to send back to their family to spend. So suddenly you're going to have a massive hole in the budget starting next year.
Nonetheless, though, when you look at the record of President Salvador Sanchezs, who says he's very proud to be a leftist, several things. Inequality has fallen substantially between 2006 and 2015. Immunisation, sanitation, access to clean water, they've all improved. Do you feel the government there isn't receiving enough kudos for those achievements?
No, I mean, Salvador is quoted to be saying that he's very proud to be a leftist, usually by Venezuelan media. So that's actually a little bias on that aspect. He's actually not the most leftist of presidents, even in the continent. You have a series of reforms that have taken place in Salvador. Clearly a decrease of inequalities, investment in education, investment in social welfare. So you've seen a country that has been able to evolve and improve its quality of life despite the rampant violence and the gang activities that is actually fueled by narco traffics and the war on drugs that is waged by the US and other countries in Latin America. Okay. The issue here for Salvador is to try to be able to balance his budget down the road, because those programs were financed in large places by remittances from the US.
OK. Craig, I want to turn to you, if I may. Now, the Trump administration also ended similar programs last year for Haiti and Nicaragua. What's been the impact of those moves on those countries?
Disastrous. And let's not forget the 800,000 or so dreamers that he's hoping to deport at some point. Trump is removing these people without tolerance. But I think it's important, just for the sake of argument, to understand Trump's position. The T in TPS stands for temporary. And, every nation does populism in its own way. And the American way is to crush butterflies. And this is what Trump is doing here. His base loves this. Most of his base probably wouldn't know the difference between a Salvadorian and a Guatemalan if they fell over them in the streets. And you hear all of this talk about $500 million in remittances. Well, this is what they're saying in the Trump White House. Why should we be sending that money to El Salvador when we can keep it in the United States? Let's use it to make America great again. That's the logic, and I think it's really important that people understand, not necessarily agree, of course, with the logic behind this move.
Politics aside, if the US really wanted to help these countries, including El Salvador, what should it be doing?
Well, again, successive administrations have helped these countries with all kinds of foreign aid and military aid. And the reason we have this situation now is a bunch of politicians who didn't understand the law of unintended consequences. You allow this many non-Americans to come into the United States for X amount of time, and you believe they're going to go back? Well, they're not. Right. I mean, that is the Trump position. This money is better used domestically. Pay no attention to the local economic consequences that Remi was talking about. That does not factor into how Trump thinks. OK. Craig Copetas in Paris and Remi Piet in Miami. Thank you both very much indeed.